I presented this project during CAMM's annual conference at the Wisconsin Maritime Museum in Manitowoc. I've tweaked the slides and text just a little based on the Q&A that followed, and to add further context and clarification. Yes, there's a music bed, because that's what several years as a radio DJ will do to a person. Enjoy! Our players in this mashup of maritime history and art history are the section of Fine Arts, the US Maritime Commission, and American President lines. They were brought together in 1940 through a national competition ran by the section to decorate ships under construction by the Maritime Commission to be operated by APL. And you're thinking, Wayne, that's such an obscure topic, to which I say yes. Yes, it is. And one that's been fun to explore. Prior to the events of 1940, outfitting an ocean liner involved the use of a number of period styles. One of the best examples, Cunard Line's Aquitania. Entering the North Atlantic trade in 1914, her public spaces, like many an Edwardian liner, were a variety of 18th century styles, French and British, aping this castle, that chateau, with a splash of Dutch-influenced artworks. This mindset began to give way in the late 1920s, with ships like the Ile-de-France and the Bremen, both very modern, with clean lines, minimal ornamentation. Soon after, as the Great Depression put the hurt on travel, all steamship companies realized that to compete, to survive, they also needed to replace increasingly inefficient tonnage dating back to before World War I. They had little choice but to turn to their governments for help. These circumstances gave birth to the ship of state. A ship of state is one that embodies its country of origin, a movable exhibit of its modern achievements in the arts and technology. These are the go-to examples. Normandy was heavily subsidized by the French, and after sitting idle at the shipyard for over 2 years, Queen Mary was completed only after Parliament agreed to loan Cunard the funds. But what of the United States? Among the many pieces of New Deal legislation passed by President Roosevelt was the Merchant Marine Act of 1936, which created the Maritime Commission, and they were tasked with rebuilding our merchant fleet through construction and operating subsidies. Their team of naval architects created designs for cargo ships, tankers, and passenger liners, which would then be tweaked by the companies wanting to operate them. One caveat: these ships could be called up for war service. The building plan was 50 ships a year for 10 years. Hull number 1 was a ship of peace, a passenger liner named appropriately America. United States lines, having been burned by the Leviathan, a white elephant with its grand soaring spaces, hesitated to build something similar, which meant something larger on the scale of a Queen Mary, which was out of the question. About her work for the mid-size America, interior designer Dorothy Markwald noted the break from tradition, quote, "Was America to cling to the designs of the old foreign cabinet makers, or follow the new foreign ship stylists, or strike out for herself? It was appropriately decided that this latest of our passenger ships should distinctly and completely represent our own national personality," end quote. This quest for a national personality would extend to the smaller vessels under construction as well, particularly those for American President lines, a company that almost didn't exist. APL rose from the ashes of the Dollar Line, known for its trans-Pacific and round-the-world service. The company was in dire straits by the mid-1930s. In the fall of 1938, in the interest of commerce and national security, the government stepped in and ate the debt for a majority stake in the company. Think the government's bailout of GM in 2008. As the Dollar ships were named for presidents, the reformed company became American President Lines. Among the first orders of business, 7 ships for the round-the-world service based on the Maritime Commission's C3 design. They would be built by the Newport News Shipbuilding and Drydock Company in Virginia. In addition to naval architects, the Maritime Commission had its own interior designers. Their chief dismissed decorations as secondary, writing off any possible contributions by the section of Fine Arts. This is called foreshadowing. Beginning in 1934, the mission of the section of Fine Arts was to, quote, "secure suitable art of the best quality available for the embellishment of public buildings," end quote. This was done through local, regional, and national competitions. Without the section and the other federal arts programs of the day, a generation of artists would not have been able to continue in their craft. That is not to say those artists didn't game the system. They were quick to learn they could be awarded mural work for spaces not advertised and would often paint to please the section. This became known as section style, closely linked to regionalism. In regards to post offices, the scenes were familiar and would inspire pride in the community. While it hit a high point in 1939 with its 48-state competition, a nationwide contest to put a mural in every state of the Union, it was on borrowed time. Construction of federal buildings was winding down, and when Hitler invaded Poland, the United States began shifting to a war footing. The section, however, was determined to remain relevant. One avenue, the Maritime Commission's building program. By their calculations, they could decorate up to 60 ships with, depending upon the size of the vessel, anywhere from $4,000 to $50,000 in art, plus thousands of stateroom pictures. Discussions between the section and Maritime Commission weren't heated, but there was a tension ultimately broken by FDR. Finally, the section was given the task of organizing a national competition for mural work to go aboard the President Jackson. Work for the other 6 depended on the results. Section competitions were open and anonymous. Artists were asked to fasten an envelope containing their name and address on the back of their unsigned entry to be opened only if the design was selected. Staff numbered entries as they arrived. For the 48-state competition, they were organized by state. A jury would discuss and debate, and then the final choices would be announced. When George Harding, muralist and instructor at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, was recruited as a juror for the Jackson competition, he immediately saw the potential for American art. He praised the works on Holland America's New Amsterdam while panning the ostentatiousness of the Normandy and calling the Manhattan and Washington examples of bad taste, adding, quote, "The ship will be viewed and admired or criticized in every port of the 7 seas. What a grand opportunity to prove what can be done. I have lived on ships, all the way around the world. You are aboard them with no opportunity to get out quick like you can from a bad exhibition ashore." End quote. Talk about setting the bar. Compared to the Queen Mary, President Jackson was wee. Half the length, 9,000 gross tons compared to 81,000, 96 passengers as opposed to 2,000. The square footage of the Jackson's public spaces could fit in Queen Mary's main restaurant 5 times over. But the artworks would not follow suit. Here are the 2 murals from Queen Mary's smoking room and scaled to what was expected for the Jackson's main lounge. Obviously, the art would be a focal point, not an afterthought. This chart shows the sizes for each space and the awards. The amounts in parentheses are today's equivalent. The circular panels for the dining room would later be dropped due to lack of quality entries. Here is the art in scale to one another, and the dots on the deck plan show their location. It would not be smooth sailing, for shortly after the section announced the Jackson competition, the Maritime Commission launched their own, invitation only, for the other 6 ships. On that invite list, George Harding, muralist and instructor at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. Harding told the section, and FDR stepped in again, because in the spring of 1940 he had nothing else on his plate. Entries received by the Maritime Commission would be handed over to the section, and the 7th ship, President Polk, would be dropped altogether. The Jackson jury met first in early June. On the last day, an American President Line's VP showed up, and they were none too pleased. The situation was diffused, and the jury met again a few weeks later to discuss what would go in the Monroe and Hayes. By this point, APL had sent a list of preferred subject matter, which guided the selections for the Garfield, Adams, and Van Buren. Of course, when everyone saw the completed works installed in the President Jackson, no one remembered what all the fuss was about. Press releases said 462 artists submitted 1,462 designs, making it the section's 2nd largest competition. Even at 3%, Wisconsin was in the top 5 in terms of the number of artists submitting, with New York dominating at 28%, the bulk in New York City. Interestingly, as the home port for American President Lines was San Francisco, California's turnout was less than I expected at only 7%. 22 artists from 8 states were awarded 30 commissions for 72 artworks, the bulk again in New York. Next was California, then Wisconsin. Before we get into Wisconsin's contributions, let's explore some of the entries. It was a healthy mix of Art Deco and portraits, maps and the zodiac, mythology and nautical themes, nature, other cultures, and the abstract. The first design logged in was a daring work of abstract symbolism by Arshil Gorky, hoping to recapture the success of his commission for the Newark airport. Even though it was an anonymous competition, Gorky's work was unmistakable. Sadly, it was not selected. Bordering on the abstract was this winning design by Willem de Kooning, who was going by William at that time, fearing questions over his citizenship. From Wisconsin, Thomas Dietrich of Appleton and Edmund Lewandowski of Milwaukee were 2 of the 4 artists from the Midwest awarded contracts. Born in 1912, Dietrich's artistic talent emerged while attending the Experimental College at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He entered many government contests, but his first win was in the Jackson competition. In 1944, he became an artist in residence at Lawrence University, where he remained for 30 years. In 1952, he co-founded the Wisconsin Watercolor Society. He died in 1998. This is Dietrich's winning overmantel design for President Van Buren's lounge. Nature and man-made elements make a nice framing device for this bustling port scene. The $1,400 award allowed him to get married. Dietrich submitted 2 other entries that didn't make the cut. A placid port scene, perhaps in the Caribbean, was meant for the dining room, and this one was intended for the library. I call it A Girl in Every Port, because there's no way that's not the same guy. In looking at the correspondence discovered so far, Dietrich's experience regarding the Van Buren was uneventful. That was not the case for Lewandowski. Born in 1914, success as an artist came early, particularly with the good fortune of being represented by the prestigious Downtown Gallery in New York. He also executed several post office murals. During the war, he made maps for the Air Force. Afterwards, he became an instructor at the Layton School of Art, then at Florida State University. His final position was at Winthrop University in Rock Hill, South Carolina. He remained in South Carolina after his retirement, and he too passed away in 1998. He was awarded 2 library murals, one for President Garfield and one for the Van Buren, each at $1,000. It is unclear why the awards for the other 5 ships were less than the ones for the President Jackson, but no one seemed overly concerned about it. First, the Garfield. Originally a dining room entry, it was cropped to fit. Elements of precisionism, a style Lewandowski was most associated with, are seen with the straight lines and perfect order of the masts, rigging, and bows. The Van Buren mural was more section style. Lewandowski was filmed as he painted this mural. You can find it on YouTube. No sound, but very interesting to watch, and you can see the concept has been altered with several differences seen here. And he shouldn't have done that. In June 1941, the Maritime Commission had 6 points of contention with the progress photos, including the clear departure from the original sketch, and suggested an inferior composition overall. By November, the mural was installed. The Commission's mood had not improved, calling Lewandowski's draftsmanship erratic and poor. This dragged out to February 1942, when the only practical solution left was to take the mural as is with a 3% reduction in the contract. Starting in November 1940, the President Jackson class entered service. All made at least one voyage except President Adams, which was handed over to the Navy days before scheduled delivery to APL. Overall, the spaces were well received. Even though the dining room wasn't 2 or 3 stories high, it was very supper club in its atmosphere and air-conditioned, which was still a novelty then. But like all able merchant ships, the President Jackson class served in World War II. 1 was lost. 4 remained with the Military Sea Transportation Service after the war to shuffle servicemen and their dependents around the world, and 2 went back to American President lines. Out of the 72 artworks commissioned, 2 are known to exist today. The de Kooning was rediscovered by those working on a catalogue raisonné in the 1970s. It was removed and now resides at the National Gallery of Art. Also removed was the overmantel by Adelaide Briggs, and it's in the library of the Merchant Marine Academy at Kings Point, New York. While the timeline has been pretty well fleshed out, research continues. Only photos of President Jackson's interiors have been found, and a troubling chunk of correspondence is missing, mostly from the artist's point of view. Case in point, I have no idea what Lewandowski said during the Van Buren affair. What was his counterargument? But these gaps do not discount the factors that created the President Jackson class, that qualify them as ships of state. The government stepping in to save the company, the construction and operating subsidies, and last but not least, the art. Yes, the ships were small, but they packed an artistic punch. The art was chosen in a democratic fashion, not by a designer's go-to list. And they were not of any dated school. They were contemporary in style, if not modern. In fact, if it weren't for the section's blatant disregard of its own mission, I doubt these artworks would have existed at all. As for the long term, I anticipate turning this project into a book and/or touring exhibit. We'll see how things develop on those fronts. In the meantime, I have a website which shows the artworks created for American passenger ships built between 1927 and 1962. It is a work in progress as well, and you can see all the winning entries in the President Jackson competition. Stay tuned, there will be more to come. Queries are welcome.